Hello, here we are again to create another one of our series of astrobiographies. Today, Jenny and I are going to be talking about Betty White. So how excited are you about talking about Betty White, Jenny?
Well, I'm excited now. She's got a really interesting chart.
She does have a really interesting chart. She really does. So before we dive into that, Jenny is of hiddenpathastrology.com. I am of astrolore.org. And please track us down out there on other social media. You can find us most everywhere you go. And let's see, be sure, please, to like our video, share our video, and make comments, suggest other people for us to talk about, and enjoy this conversation about Betty White.
Sounds good.
So who's
Yeah.
Betty White? Who is she?
Betty White. Betty White is an actor who unfortunately passed away not too long ago, actually December 31st, 2021. She was almost 100 years old. That means she was born in 1922. She was an actor for most of her career. She started out in sitcoms in the 1950s, had the distinction of being one of the first women, or no, the first woman to have full creative control over the content. Very rare in the 50s. And she stayed active in her career all the way up till very close to the end of her life. She probably is best known for being in the sitcom Golden Girls, which is unique in the fact that it highlighted older women past retirement age in the lead roles, and it being actually pretty funny. I mean, and being in a comedy role. So I think that's kind of the highlights. There's a few other things in there, but
Yeah. I think one of the things about her that just amazes me and made me feel like it was worth really looking into this chart is just the longevity of her career. And the she really was on the top of her game in so many ways all the way through. In Hollywood in general, women lost their value around the time they hit 30 back, in her day. And
mhm.
she continued, well into her 90s, for God's sake. That's a very, very powerful career. And another thing I want to just mention, and we'll probably talk about it more when we get into the chart, is her incredible depth of commitment and love toward the animal kingdom.
Mhm.
She loved animals, and she always said that if she hadn't gone into showbiz, she really was interested in doing things with animals, and she was on boards of zoos, and she did a lot of work for animal rights. So
Yeah.
that was another important thing about her.
Yeah, and I think she did get some awards for her work with animals, for her charitable work with
Yeah,
animals, which is really awesome.
yeah,
I think, oh, I just want to mention there are a couple
yeah,
documentaries about
yeah,
her. There's one of them is on PBS. It's Betty White, the First Lady of Television.
yeah.
And then the one that I'm going to guess she was working on up until her death, because it came out right after she died, is Betty White, A Celebration. So
Uh-huh.
if you want to check out more or you want to find out more about her, go and take a look at those. Um, the other thing I wanted to say about her, which I think is unique, is that she made a conscious choice to not have children.
Yeah,
So just imagine being a woman born in the 20s and growing up, really coming of age as an adult in the 50s and just deciding, nope,
right,
I'm not having children. I mean, just
right.
think about
Yeah,
the effort that took. Oh, I
yeah,
think that that's pretty remarkable because that
yeah.
is not the norm, that's for sure.
Yeah, it
So,
is
yeah.
remarkable. And I believe that was what ultimately ended her first two marriages. I didn't watch either one of these documentaries, and I wish I had. I listened
Yeah.
to some stuff to kind of give me some thoughts about her, but I at some point maybe I should. But I believe that's what one of the big issues with both of her first two marriages, and then her last marriage. They were both very happy to not have children.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
I think,
she
yeah.
she really did have a very unique opinion of herself as a woman. She did not want or need children. She did not want to be subjective to a husband either. So that those things were very, very clear and very unique for a woman born in the 1920s.
Yeah, absolutely. You reminded me when you said that. I do think I think her third husband probably had kids. I think he did have kids from another marriage. So she was a
Yes.
step
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that was for her after.
Yeah.
I mean, it might have been really nice,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
liberating to not having been a parent herself. But anyway, side note.
Yeah.
Should we look at the
Okay.
chart?
Yeah, let's jump into that chart and take a look at what we've got.
All righty, here's Betty White.
Betty
So,
White.
what
Okay.
Lori and I have been tending to do, we've been starting with Midheaven, because the Midheaven is the place that suggests where the person showed up the most in public, their profession, their career. So that's, I think, where we've usually been starting our astrobiographies.
Yeah. So that is what we as the general public will know of someone is their midheaven. That is the most public point in the chart. And here we've got a midpoint, a midheaven in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. So we're going to immediately look. Well, first, before we even do that, what do you think of when you think of Taurus on the midheaven?
It's interesting because Taurus in the midheaven is very much like wanting things to be a certain way and keeping them that way. I don't know, there's some kind of, I think that's from Noel Till's work, that kind of description of it. Taurus is an earth sign. It's fixed. It's stubborn. It's going to stay with it. It's very resistant. And it's going to be, I don't know, Taurus often has concerns of the body or sensuality and things like that.
Yeah. Very steadfast. What, yeah, I mean, that is the fixed earth sign. Once something is working, we're going to keep it that way.
Yeah.
So maybe that is a part of why her career, just that stable point where she maintained that for such a length of time. And then if you look for Venus, there you've got Venus in Capricorn in the 6th house. The day-to-day effort of doing her job is very clear there. And, Venus also, issues of beauty, and she was considered a beautiful woman with her cute little dimple, all of that. So, and Venus itself in this chart is, let's see, Venus makes, it conjuncts the sun and trines the moon.
Yep, and then it squares Jupiter. So all in all,
squares Jupiter.
It's in pretty good shape, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being squared by Jupiter isn't gonna necessarily.
Right. We think of squares as being difficult and challenging and places where, things have to be worked out. But with Jupiter, how hard can it get, for one thing? And, where the difficulties, when I see Jupiter in a trine, the difficulties tend to be overdoing something. And, this could speak to, she may have been a bit of a workaholic here.
So I was going to say, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because in sort of more modern astrology, Venus conjunct the sun is a pretty beneficial situation. And it talks about those values and that kind of, I don't know, the more softer qualities of Venus being part and parcel of her whole character, with the sun representing character. In ancient astrology, it suggests that this Venus might have a little bit of a struggle getting things done because it's under the beams of the sun. It's invisible because it's so close to the sun. But it seems to me like, and it seems like it's a pretty effective Venus.
Yeah. How close, when you think of that combust the sun, that how close? What would be the orb you would give it? 15?
Yeah, 15 degrees, like if it's within 15 degrees of the sun, and that's just technically speaking. If you were to go look out in the sky and Venus was about 15 degrees from the sun, you might just barely start being able to make it out. So, but it's just something to consider, something to kind of weigh in your mind, is what is the condition of this Venus. Really, it's doing well. It's trining that moon pretty well. So that's a nice support to one another. The value supporting the emotional needs and vice versa.
Yeah. And if you think of it in more, psychological terms, this is just this sun trining the moon. This is just such a sweet spot. You can think of it as the relationship between the parents that she grew up with. Just a very nice flow between the moon and, the
Mhm.
emotional nature and the values,
Mhm.
being very aligned.
Yeah, and in very simple terms, if you were just to glance at this chart and see that the moon is in the second house in an earth sign, the sun is in the sixth house in an earth sign, and the midheaven
Is
is in
in
the
an
10th
earth
house in
sign.
an earth sign. What that is, that's making a statement about being able to do the practicalities of work, of rolling up your sleeves and getting to work.
Right.
The moon in the second house shows a lot of resources
Yeah.
to just get to work. The sixth house is day-to-day slog, being good at it, and then the 10th house is the profession.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in some ways her chart is extremely simple
Right. It
because
is. And
that's what
then,
it's making a statement about. So
yeah, and the sun ruling the ascendant.
right.
So there you have it. It is just expressed not only out into, I mean, if you just look at that Venus and sun, Venus ruling the midheaven, the sun ruling the ascendant. Yeah, she's kind of, it does. It's a very simple statement in a lot of ways
Mhm.
here. That's
But it would miss the other thing that we do need to talk about.
right. Now,
Um,
what is the other thing we need to talk about, Jenny?
Well, I think the easiest way to access it is to think about the midheaven and look at what's opposed to midheaven, almost exactly within 2 degrees. You have Mars in Scorpio opposing the midheaven. So think about that. We have this nice tranquil midheaven, and then you've got this Mars in Scorpio, like down at the bottom with a clear view of the sort of tranquil stability of that midheaven. So this to me is like her chutzpah. I mean, this is where she
Right. And
kind of
it,
gets spiky with people a little bit.
yeah, and it's also, the home, family, that stress. This is her early marriages that wanted her to settle down and have children. And she's like, no way, I'm going to work.
Yeah.
There's definitely something in that. And then that Mars also is a part of this T square,
Mhm.
right? That's a strong T square. And we could extend it into a grand cross as well. That kind of is a little stretch on the orbs, I think. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
is
the
it?
orbs are good.
Yeah, the orbs are good, aren't they?
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I think more of the question that Lori and we talked a little bit about was just do you include a point
Right.
like the midheaven or the ascendant into a square? And
It doesn't really matter.
it
I
doesn't really
tend,
matter. 'Cause- yeah,
yeah, I
agreed.
tend to, you tend not to, but it really, either way, there's a certain amount of stress, and where it works itself out. I kind of like it with this one, with this T square, to think of it just as the T square outletting into the career.
Yeah, I think maybe just mentally it might be an easier way to grasp it because I
Yeah,
think I remember when I was learning about grand crosses and even still like they can be really overwhelming because
yeah,
you're like, oh my God, there's this huge thing and there's all these squares and these oppositions and there's two oppositions and there's all these different squares and it's take a deep breath and if you think about it in this case using it then you can think about the T square kind of being resolved into the midheaven like
yeah,
that her way of coping with the stresses of the T square is to have a powerful career.
yeah,
And that's what she did.
yeah,
So I think that that's a simple way to think about it, but it's certainly not incorrect to describe this as a grand cross
right,
either.
right.
Um, but one thing I think a bit is these type of situations is think about Neptune square Mars, and then think separately about the other ones. And in whatever order you want to, but Neptune square Mars is a very charismatic
Yeah,
situation.
yeah. Yeah, it really does. It brings in a lot of charisma and it's right there on the ascendant. And that's, the thing that everyone related to her was from that point of her incredible charisma and how she could just connect with people so easily. And and people really liked her a lot. I was listening to something today, a YouTube video, and they were just talking to all these different people who had worked with her, and just how she just really listened to other people and connected in such a way. And I love that statement of the Mercury in Aquarius. I think Mercury in Aquarius
Mm.
is such a has such an ability to listen and connect in a very human way, and there's such a intellectual component in there,
Mm.
in that
Interesting.
Mercury.
And being in that seventh house of like, so
Yeah,
sitting down one on one with somebody, you're going to
yeah,
feel heard if she's doing it well, which it sounds like she
yeah.
was.
It really sounds, from some of the people that I heard talking about her, like if she was talking to you and you were in in a room full of all kinds of people and all kinds of stuff going on with this movie making business, but if she was talking to you, you knew she was right there with you. She wasn't
Hmm.
distracted. And there was a lot of that was talked about that was interesting. And I think that's probably that gift of that Mercury right there in the
Yeah.
seventh house.
Yeah, you just made me think of something else. Like, so a little bit later in her career, I think in the 1960s, she kind of got really into doing game shows. And
Yeah.
she would appear on these game shows. And I was thinking, what a perfect setup for a game show to have this super bright mind with, Mercury and Aquarius, and then square Mars and Scorpio. So just like being able to pull answers kind of from the deep quickly,
And
like
the
just,
competition of it
yeah,
too. The competition
yeah.
of it. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about how witty she was and how, yes, she could just these quick little
Singer.
comebacks. And also with that, thinking about that particular T square, how kind of saucy and flirtatious and, innuendos. And she would throw out things that would be shocking from somebody else, but coming out from her cute little face with her little dimple, people were like shocked, but would accept a lot from her, even back, in the day when women were not supposed to have those thoughts, much less let them come out out
Yeah.
of them. But she was very, very witty and saucy.
Mm.
I like that word, saucy.
Yeah, that's a great. I was like, ooh, I love that word, Lori. Nice word. Yeah.
Well, I think it really
Oh,
fits her
mhm.
type of that kind of banter that she would do.
Yeah. Yeah. But the other thing I liked that reading about was just how she kind of got some people were just saying she was an early proponent of racial equity because she had
Oh
a person of
yeah.
color on her show, and she was
Yes.
told to remove him, and she just said no. This is in 1954, so
Yep.
it's pretty
Yep.
early on. So I think that's good. I mean, she, when you're a white person in positions of privilege and such, like you got to stand up for the people who are not, and she did that at
Yes.
like way ahead of her time. And
Yeah.
just because it seems like, I don't know that much about it, but she just was like, this is not right, so
Yeah.
we're not doing that.
Yeah, and
uh,
that
great.
is pretty amazing for someone born in 1922 who clearly had so much privilege. I mean, she was so white. Her name was White. And, she was a single
Yeah.
child with two adoring parents, and, the family, she had a lot of privilege.
Mhm.
And she didn't, yeah, the fact that she really stood her ground with that black man in the 50s and said, no, if you try to get rid of him, you're getting rid of me too.
Mhm.
That's really a
Yes.
good thing, a good thing.
Yeah. I know she is. Yeah, this is interesting. I think the only thing, just to take it back a little bit more, I guess she, in the Great Depression, that's when her family moved, or maybe they moved to California from Illinois. I think actually
Okay.
maybe before that, and then kind of got through the Great Depression in California. And she was a big nature enthusiast and dragged her parents out to the Sierras a bunch, and really wanted to be a park ranger, but was denied because she was female. So that was very early on.
Right.
Though I think in 2010 she was made into an honorary ranger.
Oh,
So
isn't that awesome?
a park ranger, yeah.
That's so awesome. Well, one
Kind of
of
look
the things, I think I read somewhere that, yeah, it was in the Depression, and I don't remember what it was her father was doing, but people couldn't pay him, and he ended up taking a dog for payment for some. They ended up with, I don't remember, it was like 20 dogs or something in her family when she was very small. So that was probably the start of her incredible connection with animals as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, she wanted to be a park ranger and run a zoo and take care of animals. Funny lady.
Lori, where do you usually look for pets in the chart?
Sixth house right there, the responsibility to the animals.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of pets as being in that sixth house in large part because pets are so connected to our day-to-day routines. If you've got a dog or a cat or a horse out in the barn, you can't just, occasionally feed it.
Yeah.
It has to become part of your everyday routine. And yeah, oftentimes people with strong components in the sixth house are very, very attached to animals. It's pretty common. Yeah.
I can relate to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking some of the other things that we were saying about her. I was realizing just that Uranus in Pisces in the 8th house, that might be some of that compassion for the, struggles with other people, just bringing other people forwards when it was like disapproved of or what have
Yeah.
you. So,
yeah, that makes sense too, because
yeah.
especially that Uranus ruling that Mercury, that Aquarius Mercury too. This kind of a connection there.
Yeah, and I was just realizing the other thing that we were talking about, the other way that Mars really pops, besides being opposite the midheaven, is that it's also part of a grand trine.
I love this.
Which, and so we always talk about the emotional stability of a water grand trine. This is a person who's like, I'm self-sufficient with my emotions. And on one hand, that might be a defense mechanism, like they don't let anyone else in. But this is probably also how she stood her ground and did not have children, and in her relationships and also in her career. That she's like, no, I'm good.
And it also, another thing, I love it, just the way that this is drawn out. You see that focus right on that Mars.
Yeah.
It's just so clear that Mars is such a point of focus there. But I think it's interesting because this is a grand trine that does not have the involvement of the sun or the moon. And the way I think of that, of a grand trine that does not have one of the lights involved, is it creates sort of a separate agenda in some ways. And with this, I would think of this as kind of, yeah, she's got this whole career in Hollywood, and yet her heart is in the animal kingdom. So there's kind of an interesting change there. Two different pieces going on there.
That's a good point. Is I just think overall she was a person who I don't know, kind of subtly made some change in a way, and it wasn't like a big splash. It wasn't what I was thinking of when we talked about doing her chart, but when you look at this, it's undeniable that she was doing some things that were pushing the agenda for women to, as we talked about in the beginning, older women to have a show and to be comedy. Very, very unusual and unique.
Old women were not supposed to be in Hollywood. Yeah, she really did. And for someone born in 1922, she did a good job. She really did. She did some good work. She made some differences. I think it's so interesting how, if you look just at the aspects, at the aspect grid itself, how the sun and the moon aren't terribly active. Mercury is so active.
Yeah, it sure is.
And Mars is active. Mercury is the most active in that chart. That is the intellect, the wit, the quick wit with that Scorpio, that Mars in Scorpio squaring it. That's an interesting chart. Okay.
Cool.
Let's see. What else do we want to think about?
Well,
what about the archetypes? What about like that archetypal statement we sometimes make? You have any, what would you say for that?
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point. I was thinking the sun as being sort of either the strategist or the authority in her field, what she was doing. And then the Virgo has this more, well, I wrote down the word servant. And in this case, I really meant the servant to that sun. So the sun is like the strategist, and then the moon is like, okay, how are we going to get it done? I'm going to call this person. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to do this thing, and just really gets it done, you know? And then the final one, the Leo, is the performer. I mean, and they work beautifully together. It's, and that level, it's a simple statement, as we said earlier.
Yeah. There's a lot about this chart that is extremely simple, and a lot about it that gets into a lot more juiciness. that Mars and the Mercury, those are the two that I think really add some zest to this chart.
Yeah. And then I was just thinking, with the midheaven being ruled by Venus, and Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn. So what that does is it means Saturn is in Libra, Venus's sign, and Venus is in Capricorn, which is Saturn's sign. And it makes this really good statement around just hard work, having the discipline to make it happen, like having that Saturn work together with Venus to really make her career take off. So a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah. And that's on that note, I just want to mention that there's no fire in this chart. She had an incredible work ethic and demand to push on that. And without the fire, she had to really lean on that earth to get things done, the ambition.
Yeah. And also, she has a very powerful Mars. So she doesn't have the fire, but she's got the spark somewhere else. She's got a powerful active principle. So, yeah.
It's fascinating. Okay. We could keep talking, or we could just wrap it up and say, wasn't this interesting?
Yeah. I will stop sharing and close it up.
Okay. Well, that was fun. That was an easy one. I just want to say to anybody who's listened this long and is still listening, we had a whole lot of people we were going to do, and yet everything just kind of pointed to, let's do Betty White. It's going to be simpler. We need to get one out. If you've got recommendations of people, particularly people that are in the news currently, that you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know, and we will consider it. Consider whatever is recommended. We might not do it, but we'll consider it. Okay. Well, thank you, Jenny. This has been fun.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.